Hi there, I'm Zara Danejo. Welcome to Roundup. Sickle cell disease is a hereditary blood disorder that affects red blood cells, starving them of oxygen. It can cause painful complications such as painful joints, anemia, fevers, which lead to several days of pain and suffering and hospitalization. My guest today is Samira Sanusi, is a survivor of sickle cell disease. Yes, you heard that right, a survivor. Samira was born with sickle cell disease, and her journey to health was a tortuous one, involving several surgeries culminating in a bone marrow transplant. Samira joins me in studio today to talk about her remarkable story surviving sickle cell. Samira, welcome to Roundup.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
So let's start from the beginning. How early on in life did you know that you had this disease?
I think the moment I started being aware of myself, so maybe from the age of 5 or 6, I didn't really know that I had a disease or that I was sick, but I had this strong sense that I was not okay and I was not normal like the other kids. So it was much later in life that I realized the struggles and the obstacles that I was facing, the pain and the hospitalizations. It was much later that I realized that it was actually an illness, a disease. But when I was a kid, I pretty much just knew that I was not okay, I was not normal, but it wasn't a consistent feeling. It was just usually when I had restrictions like not being able to play too much, or not being able to have a lot of sweets. That's when I knew that, okay, there's definitely a difference between I and other children.
So what was childhood like, living with constant hospitalization and pain?
Childhood was really rough. It was rough. It was isolating in the sense that kids are having their own separate lives, and you are having an entirely different existence and experience. And my kind of experience with sickle cell anemia required me to be hospitalized regularly. I think I was in the hospital almost every month.
But what about school?
Well, the hospital room became my classroom pretty much, yeah, because I was spending more days in a hospital room than I was spending it at home or in classrooms. And the irony of it was I really loved school. I loved going to school. I loved learning. But unfortunately, I missed so many school days. And every time I went back, it was exhausting because there was always a lot of catching up to do. There was that feeling of constantly being left behind and trying to make up for lost time. But the little time I spent in school, I really enjoyed it and I thrived.
Yeah. So sickle cell is a hereditary disease. Tell me about your parents' reaction when they realized that their small daughter has sickle cell.
I think they were really devastated. It was something that it changed them. It devastated them, it broke their hearts, especially realizing that they were responsible for me being born with the illness. And during that time, there was not a lot of awareness about the disease. And even people who knew about sickle cell disease did not know that it could be prevented, or that you are required to know your genotype and your partners before getting married.
So this is in the 80s and 90s?
Yes,
where, okay.
Yes, I think in the 70s actually.
Yeah, okay.
So there were a few people who knew about the disease but did not know that it could be prevented or that there were tests required and stuff like that. So them finding out, especially after we were being born, after we already started to have symptoms, really broke their heart. And back then, newborn screening was not really available here, so there were no resources like your baby being screened immediately after birth, the parents being counseled on how to start taking care of their kids, how to avoid this and that that could cause triggers of the crisis and everything like that. But as Muslims, they handled it well and decided to dedicate their life and their resources in making sure that the disease was well managed and that they gave me a stable childhood as best as they could.
Yeah. So you've talked about being hospitalized a lot to the extent that your hospital room became your classroom. I'm thinking about how expensive it is to have this disease, especially for parents. How do you pay for all those medical bills?
It is really, really, really expensive because it's a disease that doesn't give you a break at all. You can't catch a break, whether it's for the patients themselves or the families or caregivers. This is an illness that literally everything going on in your environment or in your life can trigger you. If the weather is too hot and you get dehydrated, a crisis can start. If it's too cold, especially during Harmattan season, it can start. If your blood level is too low and you need the donation, you can have a crisis or need to be hospitalized. So all these bills, they add up. And it's a struggle for so many parents, especially here in Nigeria, because so many people are struggling to make ends meet. And then being parents of special needs kids, being parents of kids who have an illness that they need to cater to, no matter how buoyant you are, eventually you feel it in your pocket and your bank account because there's always things to pay for. And the upsetting part is even when you don't regularly have crisis or need to be hospitalized, you can't put up your feet and just relax. You constantly need to also go to the hospital for tests and checkups and screenings to make sure that the disease is not causing complications in your body, joints, and organs. So those also cost money because you have tests like regular blood checks. That's even when you're totally healthy, you go in for regular blood checks. Sometimes you go in for x-rays, sometimes MRIs. Sometimes you have to check on your heart, your eyesight,
oh my
your
God,
kidney.
that's a long list of
because
tests.
Sickle cell is a disease that can affect literally every part of your body.
Wow.
From your eyes to causing a stroke, to your heart, to your spleen. It can attack any part at any time.
You know, I was going to talk about that because you're an author. You've written 2 books about your life and your experience. In your first book, S is for Survival, you do talk about, you know, being misdiagnosed and then ending up having a stroke at what? How old were you when you had your first stroke?
I was 16.
16? Yeah, 16. Yes. So I wanted to, can we talk about how you were misdiagnosed?
So is it even a misdiagnosis or just a mix-up by our darling Nigerian doctors?
So the Nigerian doctor do you? Right.
Yeah, so when the crisis started, I like to say in the beginning of my journey, because for me, being born with the disease wasn't even the beginning for me. The beginning for me was when my health deteriorated and I went into the 7-year long battle of hospitalization and fighting for my life. So when that crisis started on the 1st of July, actually 2003, we thought it was just a normal crisis, but the pain refused to go down even after fluids and medication, painkillers and whatnot. So there was this clinic that I was taken to, and without running any tests and making any observations, they started me on a series of treatments and injections.
Just like that?
Just like that, yes. And I just started to get worse almost immediately, especially my joints. And after a few days, I was taken to a different hospital, which was supposed to be better. And that was when they informed my parents and I that I had received wrong medications, especially the ones through intravenous and injections. And my body needed to be flushed ASAP. And I don't know if they were able to flush everything out or it was too late, but I knew that that was the last time I walked unaided. So after that day, I did not walk again for 6 years. I was confined to a bed and to a wheelchair. And that wrong treatment and medication paired with sickle cell complications like osteoporosis, which affects the hip joints, and septic arthritis, just didn't treat me well. So a combination of all of that just really complicated the case, where a simple treatment could have solved it, but it didn't in my in my case because things were just too complicated. And I had a series of operations here in Abuja to try and rectify the issue, to try and treat the bone infections and reverse the damage. But I believe these surgeries did not work because once I was taken out of the country, they had to be redone all over again.
So you did surgeries to fix the damage here, and those surgeries also did not work.
Yes.
And you had to go to Europe.
Yeah, to
redo the surgeries again. How much can a body take?
I don't know, but apparently mine can take everything because I'm still here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
but it was a lot.
So how did the stroke happen?
So the stroke happened actually after my bone marrow transplant. My immune system was low. As you know, they have to crash your immune system to make sure your body does not reject the donor cells.
Right.
Yes, so I was pretty vulnerable, and then it wasn't too long after the transplant. So I wouldn't say I was completely cured of sickle cell at the time. I still had it, but I was in the process of treatment. I was going through immunotherapy, and my immune system was crashed, and that's when it happened. So what I got was an infection, and the disease is called paralysis, where the left side of your face completely gets, well, in my case, the left side of my face got paralyzed. So from my eyes to, well, I don't really notice the nose. I'm still breathing. And then people who know me know that I have a lopsided smile. Yeah. So I like to say when it happened, I was always making fun of it, saying my face is temporarily out of service. And unfortunately, now I'm realizing it's not temporary. It's permanent.
As we're looking at you now, the left side of your face is paralyzed.
Yes, it is. Can you notice from the smile?
Yeah, so you cannot move your lip up or down?
No.
On your left side?
No.
Not at all?
Not at all. And at the time it happened, I couldn't even blink on my left side.
Wow.
So I didn't notice that I wasn't blinking. You know, it's something that
is subconscious.
Subhanallah, yeah, you just do. So I noticed that my left eye was getting pepperish, and then I'll use my hand and cover it, and that's how I used to blink. And then at night, the doctors will put an eye patch to cover it so that it won't get dry and stuff like that. And it affected me a lot, even though at the time I made fun of it, but I think it was a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
But I think out of everything that I've lost to sickle cell anemia, I miss my smile the most, because it was the one thing that I still had despite the struggles and everything. And when that got affected, I just felt like, okay, you've taken everything now apart from my life. But yeah, I remember when in the beginning I would smile and I'll cover my mouth to smile, and eventually I just got tired. I'm like, okay, you know what?
But I do say, if I do say so myself, you still have a very beautiful smile.
Thank you.
On that note, we'll be going on a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Roundup, and tonight we're speaking with a survivor of sickle cell disease. Some people call her Samira the survivor. Samira Haruna Sanusi joins me in studio to discuss her battle with sickle cell disease. Just before we went on break, you were speaking about, you know, how sickle cell took away your smile by paralyzing your face. How did staying 7 years in hospital, confined to a bed, how did it affect your mental health especially? How did you cope?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer, because I honestly do not know. I didn't even know about mental health issues when I was going through my battles. So after I got cured, and then I started struggling with anxiety, depression, and PTSD. But at the time, I guess part of why it didn't bother me much at the time, I was young. Yeah. So the whole thing started when I was 15. And there's this belief I have that when kids are going through disease, pain, and illness, it affects them mentally less than it affects adults. because as kids are still able to smile. They're still able to play around in the hospital room. They're still able to, find joy and do other things. Whereas for adults, the struggle is harder for them. As kids, we worry less, and our parents worry more. So I think the question is better answered by my parents, who at the time, if you ask them how did they feel, how did it affect you mentally dealing with a child who was in the hospital for all these years. Yeah. But I remember feelings of being down, being lonely and isolated, because eventually I was taken out of Nigeria. I was in Vienna, where I spent the 7 years.
That's in Austria, right?
Yes, that's Vienna, Austria. And I didn't always have family there. In fact, I didn't know anybody there till when I went and met a few friends of my dad who had their families and were always checking up on me. But it was a country where I didn't understand the language, I didn't know the people, I didn't have friends or family there, and I didn't have my family to stay with me there. So there were a lot.
So who was with you?
There was periodically my uncle will be with me for maybe a couple of months, and then he will go back to Nigeria. My mom will come and stay, and then during the summer the whole family will come as well. And in between the times, I was alone with nurses.
What did you do? Because I read in your book that you said you learned German or Dutch.
Yeah, Dutch.
Yeah, you learned Dutch because you watched so much TV.
Yes.
And that's how you understood the language.
So that was what I was doing pretty much, just watching TV. And there were no English channels. I don't know what's wrong with those people, even though I love them. But yeah, so I was watching TV constantly. But the way their healthcare system is designed, their hospitals are not just about medication, treatment, and injections, and then you go home. For long-term patients especially, there are programs designed to help patients cope and deal with whatever it is they're going through. So hospitals come with social workers, a lot of them. And these social workers are just responsible for coming into your room after you wake up in the morning, shower, eat, take your medication. They come and they spend time with you. And they come into my room and are like, okay, Samira, what would you like to do today? Do you want to write, or do you want to paint? Do you want to play some musical instruments, or do we just talk? So they do that a lot. And then there are games available, there are computers. That's how I learned how to type, like a typist, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
In a hospital?
In a hospital, yeah. So I learned a lot being there, because there were programs designed to just help the patient go through their recovery and their healing. Yeah. And I learned so many skills, even bead making, jewelry making, tie and dye on silk scarves.
And this is all in the hospital?
This is all in a German hospital, yes. I learned there's this European computer driving license I learned. It's basically the skills of using Microsoft Office.
Okay.
And I got a certificate as well.
How did you decide, when was the decision taken to say there's this new treatment, it could work, it could not work? How did you make the decision? I imagine this wasn't, an individual decision, but how did the family reach the decision to say, you know what, I think we should go for it?
So what happened was, after I left Nigeria, actually, I was first in Saudi Arabia for, I think, 3 months before I eventually went to Vienna, Austria. So the bone marrow transplant is actually the reason why I ended up in Austria. I remember at the time I was in Saudi Arabia, I was making progress, good progress, but not enough. And after those 3 months, they had come to the end of their, what will I say, capability, because they had tried everything they could and they did not believe that they had a way of getting me better. I remember for them at that time, the two options they were facing was to either amputate my legs or just take me back home and wait for my time, because they didn't believe that I was even going to survive that long. So it was my father who refused to accept those options and said, no, there has to be a way. So he started reaching out to other doctors, other hospitals around the world, especially those who had some sort of sickle cell treatment and management that had been successful. And so Austria was the first place to reply and say, okay, we've been doing bone marrow transplant for a few years now, and we've had some success rate, and we believe we can help your daughter, so you can bring her. And that's how I ended up in Austria. And at the time, I didn't even know the basics and the details of what was being discussed. I think I was just too busy being sick. But my parents were the ones working overtime, trying to find this treatment at this country and this doctor and whatnot. So it was after my dad had finished all his research, had gotten all the details, had found out the possibility of having me go down to Austria for the treatment, when he now told me, here's what he's been up to and here's what the treatment is about, and he thinks we should give it a try, and it will be successful by the grace of God. And I remember it sounded really scary because I was like, transplant? That's something I only hear on TV when I watch episodes of ER. At the time I used to watch medical shows, and I'm like, wow, this is so crazy. How can people go through this? How can people be cut open and do this and that? I didn't know that it was about to be my story as well. So basically my dad just explained it to me. He didn't really even have to convince me. I think no one needed conviction because it was the only option left to try. It was the last card to be played.
Yeah.
So it was like just, it was a do or die affair.
Yeah. So at the time you went over, when you went under the knife, what were the possibility, what was like the percentage of, this working or not working out?
So I don't know about the numbers. They were not sure. No one was sure, especially because I had so many complications that were factored in the transplant, and complications that could jeopardize the success of it. At the time I got to Austria, literally almost every organ on my body was struggling and had effects of sickle cell anemia. But like I said, it was our last hope. It was our only option. So we just had to go for it. I believe that my chances of survival and success were just slightly higher than 50%. But in the end, it was 100% successful.
So at the time, your chances were slightly higher, let's say like a 52%, and you still went ahead with it?
Yes.
Or your father still went ahead with it?
I believed him. I trusted him.
Yeah.
He had been with me every step of the way.
Right.
And I knew that if he said this will work, then
let's go for
it will work, and we'll go for it.
Yeah.
I was willing to do whatever. I mean, despite how sick and close to dying I was, I wanted to live. Yeah, I wanted to live.
Did you think about death a lot?
I did, especially when I was in Nigeria, because in Nigeria I was just not seeing any light at the end of the tunnel. There was no hope. I was just being hospitalized. There was no plan by the doctors on the treatment. There were no long treatment plans. There were no projections. My prognosis were not good. So the days were really dark then. I remember laying on my hospital bed and asking God to take my life. I still remember that. And I remember waking up every morning and just being so devastated that I was still here.
And this is as a 14-year-old?
Yes, as a 15-year-old.
14, 15-year-old?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there were a lot of days like that. And even when I started to get better and recover, there were days where I just felt like I just wanted to be spared. I didn't want any more pain. I didn't want any more surgeries. I didn't want any more physiotherapy. I didn't want any more hospitalizations and treatments, because at that young age, I understood that there was a lot of work to be done. There was a lot of treatments that I needed. It wasn't just like having one surgery or one treatment and it working and then me continuing my life. No, there were treatments that would require years, and that's why I ended up being in Austria for 7 years. And there were times when in between treatments, I'll even take breaks, go back to school, or just leave my life. But at the back of my head, I always knew that I wasn't done. Like, it wasn't over.
There's always something.
Yes, and we never knew. We didn't know when it was going to be over. So there were times where I just felt like I just didn't want any more of it anymore. But I just kept praying that if I was truly going to be healthy again, then God should grant me the patience and the strength to hang on
Yeah.
and to trust Him.
Yeah, absolutely remarkable. This has been part 1 of our discussion on surviving sickle cell disease with Samira Haruna Sanusi. Thank you for joining us. Do keep a date with us on next week's episode, where part 2 will feature a continuation of our discussion. Recently, a Twitter account posted that Amira Sufyan, posting as herself, that she had been kidnapped by 4 Yoruba men and 2 Fulani men, and she was in a bus with 17 other Nigerians, including pregnant women and children. As expected, the whole country rallied around Amira. We were all thrown in a panic, and everyone wanted to know what the police, what DSS were doing to make sure that Amira had been found. As it turns out, Amira was lying. Amira was not kidnapped, and she had staged her disappearance allegedly to meet with a special friend. Now, Amira is still in custody in the FCT police, and there's been a lot of discussion on Twitter, Facebook, and other social media on what should happen to her. Amira has issued an apology via Twitter again, claiming that she deliberately took herself into the bushes and dehydrated herself and posted those locations because of her delusions and negative thinking. She has also asked Nigerians for her prayers because, to quote her, "I really need it." But I have to wonder, the official account is that, at least on the streets, the official account is that she was found in a hotel in Ikeja and that those locations were completely made up. And when you think about it, if someone kidnaps you and wants to take you to Lagos, what would they be doing in Plateau State? I think I speak for all Nigerians when I say that there should be some sort of accountability from this young lady, so that we know we are not a society of people who just make up things, who are just mischievous because they are going through something. This has been Roundup. I'm Zara Denejo. I'll see you next week.